You've heard the term indigo thrown around in spiritual circles like it's just another personality label, another way to feel special, another identity to collect alongside empath, old soul, light worker. But Carl Jung identified something decades before the modern spiritual marketplace turned it into a hashtag, a specific psychological configuration so rare and so disruptive that the people who carry it almost never fit anywhere. Not because they're choosing to be difficult, because their consciousness is wired in a way that makes them fundamentally incompatible with systems built on denial. Jung never used the word indigo. That came later. But what he documented in his research, the specific constellation of traits, perceptions, and psychological burdens that appeared together in certain rare individuals, maps perfectly onto what we now recognize as the Indigo Empath. These weren't just sensitive people. They weren't just empaths with strong feelings. They were people whose psychological architecture operated on a completely different frequency than the world around them. And that difference created a life experience so specific, so isolating, and so misunderstood that most indigo empaths spend decades believing something is fundamentally broken in them. It's not. What's happening is something Jung found both fascinating and troubling. These individuals carry a combination of penetrative awareness, emotional intensity, and an almost allergic reaction to inauthenticity that makes them natural disruptors of any system they enter. They don't try to disrupt. They just exist. And their existence exposes what everyone else is pretending not to see. Today I'm going to reveal the 7 specific signs Jung identified that distinguish indigo empaths from ordinary empaths, why each sign creates both extraordinary power and devastating difficulty, and what it means if you recognize yourself in every single one of these markers. The first sign is what Jung described as an involuntary rejection of false authority. Indigo empaths don't just dislike authority figures who abuse their power. Their entire nervous system recoils from anyone operating from a position they haven't psychologically earned. This starts in childhood, and it's the trait that gets indigo empaths labeled as defiant, oppositional, or difficult before they're old enough to understand what's happening. Think about the child who refuses to obey a teacher, not because they're rebellious, but because they can sense that the teacher is operating from insecurity rather than genuine knowledge. The child can't articulate what they're perceiving. They just feel a deep, visceral wrongness when someone demands respect they haven't earned through authentic competence. So they resist, and every adult around them interprets that resistance as a behavior problem rather than a perceptual ability. Jung found that this rejection of false authority wasn't defiance. It was discernment operating before the child had language for it. Indigo empaths are detecting the gap between someone's claimed authority and their actual psychological integrity. They're sensing when power is performative rather than genuine, and their system physically cannot submit to what it perceives as fraudulent. This isn't a choice, it's a wired response, and it follows them into adulthood, making corporate hierarchies, institutional structures, and social systems built on unearned power feel suffocating in ways that other people simply don't experience. The second sign is what Jung called existential awareness from an impossibly young age. Most children live in the immediate. They're concerned with toys, friends, what's happening right now. But indigo empaths report experiencing existential questioning as early as 4 or 5 years old. Not taught, not prompted. Spontaneous awareness of death, meaning the nature of consciousness, the strangeness of existence itself. This isn't precocious intellectualism. It's a different relationship with consciousness altogether. Jung documented patients who remembered lying awake as small children, wondering why they existed, feeling the weight of mortality, sensing that the adult world was operating on agreements that didn't make sense. These children weren't anxious in the traditional sense. They were aware in ways their developmental stage shouldn't have allowed. Jung connected this to what he called early activation of the collective unconscious. In most people, the deeper layers of the psyche remain dormant until midlife or later, if they activate at all. But in indigo empaths, those layers are accessible from childhood. They're perceiving archetypal patterns, existential realities, and psychological depths that most adults spend their entire lives avoiding. And they're doing this while simultaneously being expected to care about homework and playground politics. The disconnect between their inner world and the world being presented to them creates a fracture that defines their entire developmental experience. The third sign is an intensity of emotional experience that goes beyond normal empathic sensitivity. Every empath feels deeply. That's what makes them empaths. But indigo empaths don't just feel emotions intensely. They experience emotions as full-body, multidimensional events that carry information ordinary emotional experience doesn't contain. Jung described this as emotional perception, fused with archetypal awareness. When an indigo empath feels grief, they're not just feeling personal sadness. They're touching a layer of grief that feels ancient, collective, bigger than any individual experience could explain. When they feel joy, it arrives with a quality of recognition, as if they're remembering something rather than experiencing something new. Their emotional landscape operates on a scale that makes ordinary emotional vocabulary completely inadequate. This is why indigo empaths are often misdiagnosed with mood disorders. Their emotional intensity looks pathological through a conventional lens. A psychiatrist sees the depth of feeling and reaches for a diagnosis. But Jung understood that what looks like emotional dysregulation in an indigo empath is actually emotional perception, operating at a bandwidth most people's systems can't access. The problem isn't that the indigo empath feels too much. The problem is that the world they're living in has no framework for the depth of what they're perceiving. So they learn to perform normalcy while internally experiencing reality on a scale that would overwhelm anyone who isn't wired for it. And this leads to something Jung found particularly important. Indigo empaths often feel ashamed of their intensity because every system they've moved through has told them it's too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too dramatic. They learn to compress their actual experience into socially acceptable packages, showing the world maybe 10% of what they're actually feeling. And that compression creates a kind of internal pressure that builds over years, sometimes decades, until it demands release through either breakdown or breakthrough. If this is resonating with you, if you've spent your life sensing depths that nobody around you seemed to reach, that recognition itself is worth honoring. Our new guide, True Self-Discovery, offers 24 reflection exercises rooted in Carl Jung's teachings, designed specifically for this kind of deep inner work. It's a way to finally explore what you've been carrying without having to compress it into something smaller. Click below to get True Self-Discovery, because what we're about to explore next reveals why that inner landscape matters more than you've been told. The fourth sign is what Jung identified as systemic pattern perception. Indigo empaths don't just read individual people, they read entire systems. They walk into a family, an organization, a community, and they perceive the invisible architecture holding the whole thing together, the unspoken rules. The power dynamics everyone is pretending don't exist. The dysfunction that the system has agreed to normalize. They see all of it, instantly, without anyone explaining it to them. Jung found this ability distinguished indigo empaths from other empathic types in a crucial way. Standard empaths read emotions. They feel what individuals are feeling. But indigo empaths perceive structures. They see how the entire system operates, who serves what function, where the toxicity originates, how it circulates, and why everyone unconsciously agrees to maintain it. This systemic perception makes them extraordinarily valuable in any environment that actually wants to function healthily. But it makes them threats in environments that depend on dysfunction remaining invisible. This is why indigo empaths often cycle through jobs, friendships, communities, and even spiritual groups. Not because they can't commit, because every system they enter eventually reveals itself to them, and what they see is usually something the system doesn't want exposed. They become the person who names the elephant in the room. Not to cause problems, because they genuinely can't pretend they don't see it. Their perception won't allow the kind of willful blindness that membership in most systems requires. The fifth sign is a profound and often painful inability to perform in authenticity. Most people learn social performance early. How to smile when they don't feel like smiling. How to say they're fine when they're not. How to participate in conversations they find meaningless. How to pretend interests they don't feel. These performances are the social glue that holds most interactions together, and indigo empaths are constitutionally incapable of sustaining them. This isn't about being rude or socially unskilled. Indigo empaths often understand social performance better than anyone because they can see exactly how it works. They perceive the mechanics of every social mask in the room. But when it comes to wearing their own mask, something in them resists with a force that feels physical. Performing inauthenticity creates a sensation that Jung compared to psychological suffocation. The longer they maintain the performance, the more something inside them starts to collapse. Jung documented that this inability to perform isn't a social deficit. It's a signal of advanced individuation occurring before the person is developmentally ready for it. Individuation, in Jung's framework, is the process of becoming genuinely yourself, rather than a collection of social performances. Most people don't begin this process until midlife, if ever. But indigo empaths are individuating from childhood, which means they're psychologically incapable of maintaining personas that most people wear comfortably for decades. They're trying to be real in a world that runs on performance. And that mismatch creates a loneliness so specific that only other indigo empaths truly understand it. The sixth sign is what Jung called the wound of premature knowing. Indigo empaths understand things before they have the life experience to contextualize what they understand. They perceive truths about relationships, family dynamics, institutional corruption, and human nature that children and young adults shouldn't yet be seeing. And this premature knowing creates a specific kind of psychological wound because the knowledge arrives without the emotional maturity to process it. Imagine being 12 years old and perceiving that your parents' marriage is held together by mutual avoidance rather than love. not suspecting it, seeing it with the kind of clarity that an experienced therapist might have after decades of practice. You don't have the language for what you're perceiving. You don't have the developmental capacity to integrate it, but you see it, and you can't unsee it. And nobody around you is acknowledging what you're seeing, which makes you feel insane. Jung found this wound appeared in every indigo empath he studied. They all carried knowledge that arrived too early, perception that outpaced their ability to process it, awareness that isolated them from peers who were still operating in blissful developmental ignorance. And this premature knowing created a paradox that defined their lives. They understood too much to participate innocently in the structures around them, but were too young to do anything with what they understood. So, they carried it alone, in silence, often for years, wondering why the world they were seeing was so different from the world everyone else described. This wound doesn't heal naturally with age, it compounds. Because the perception only sharpens over time. What started as seeing through your family's dynamics becomes seeing through organizational politics, then cultural narratives, then the entire structure of consensus reality. Each layer of seeing adds weight to the original wound of knowing too much too soon. And without conscious work to integrate this perception, it can calcify into either chronic cynicism or overwhelming despair. The seventh sign is what Jung considered the most defining and the most demanding. Indigo empaths carry an inexplicable sense of mission that they can never fully articulate but can never fully escape. Not a specific goal or career ambition, something deeper, more primal, almost archetypal in nature, a feeling that they're here to do something that matters, that their perception exists for a reason beyond personal survival, that their inability to participate in collective denial serves a larger purpose they can sense but can't quite name. Jung connected this to what he called vocation in the deepest sense, not a job, a calling from the self, the totality of the psyche, that demands the individual serve something larger than their personal comfort. He found that indigo empaths who tried to ignore this sense of mission became physically ill, deeply depressed, or existentially paralyzed. Their system wouldn't allow them to settle into a life that didn't honor what they were carrying. It kept disrupting every attempt at comfortable normalcy until they finally surrendered to the pull of their own deeper nature. But Jung also warned that this sense of mission was dangerous if misunderstood. Indigo empaths who interpreted their calling as a mandate to save others burned out catastrophically. Those who believed their mission required martyrdom destroyed themselves, serving people who would never appreciate the sacrifice. The mission isn't about saving the world. It's about embodying authentic consciousness in a world that rewards performance over truth. It's about being genuinely yourself, so completely that your existence gives others permission to consider what genuine selfhood might look like. This is why indigo empaths feel simultaneously drawn to meaningful work and exhausted by every system they try to work within. Their mission can't be fulfilled through conventional structures because conventional structures require exactly the kind of performance that indigo empaths can't sustain. So they spend years searching for a container that can hold what they carry. And the ones who find it or build it discovered that their entire life of not fitting in was preparation for creating something that doesn't exist yet. If you recognize yourself in these 7 signs, not 1 or 2, but the constellation, the full pattern, then what you've been experiencing has a name and a framework. You're not too much. You're not broken. You're not failing at being normal. You're an indigo empath carrying a psychological configuration that Jung spent his career trying to understand because it represented something essential about the evolution of human consciousness. The isolation you've felt isn't a flaw. It's the inevitable result of perceiving what most people can't see while living in structures designed for people who don't see it. The intensity that's been pathologized your entire life isn't dysfunction. It's the depth of processing required for the kind of perception you carry, the restlessness, the inability to settle into systems that feel hollow, the exhaustion of compressing yourself into smaller expressions just to be tolerable to people around you. All of it makes sense when you understand what you actually are. Jung believed that indigo empaths weren't aberrations. They were necessary. Every system, every family, every community needs people who can see what's actually happening underneath the performance, not to tear everything down, but to ensure that something real exists alongside the constructed. Someone has to perceive the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. Someone has to remain authentic, even when authenticity is punished. Someone has to carry the awareness that most people refuse, even when carrying it is unbearably lonely. That someone is you. And Jung would tell you that the worst thing you could do with this configuration is try to become normal. Not because normal is wrong for others, but because it's impossible for you without destroying the very thing that makes you essential. Your perception, your intensity, your inability to perform, your systemic awareness, your premature knowing, your sense of mission. These aren't problems to be solved. They're capacities to be honored, developed, and used with the kind of wisdom that only comes from accepting what you are instead of fighting it. The world will keep telling you you're too much. Let it. The people who need what you carry will recognize it without you having to explain. And the life that's waiting for you on the other side of self-acceptance looks nothing like the life you've been trying to force yourself into. It looks like you. Finally, completely, unapologetically you. And that is exactly what Jung meant when he called individuation the most important work a human being could ever undertake. If you haven't yet, and you're ready to begin that work of becoming who you actually are beneath the compression and the performance, our new guide, True Self-Discovery, walks you through 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's teachings, designed to help you find your way within at your own depth, on your own terms. Click below to get True Self-Discovery.